to the Divorce Support Club podcast.
Hello everybody, welcome to the Divorce Support Club, the 18th of February. I will quickly introduce myself and then Claire can introduce herself as well. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Lauren Preedy, the head of the relationships team at Ian Walker Family Law and Mediation. And this is a monthly club that Claire and I run to provide some additional support and information for clients of the firm. And today's topic is in relation to people that work together either in a family business or some kind of partnership or connected in some way with business. And any questions, please do raise it in the chat feature. Also, please do remember that this is anonymous as far as you wish it to be. So please do make sure if you do put anything into the chat feature that you send it just to panelists if you just want Claire and I to see it. You're very welcome today, and I'll hand you over to Claire. Thanks, Claire.
Thank you very much, Lauren. Hi, everybody. So yes, as Lauren says, the Divorce Support Club is intended to be a very friendly, informative and informal space for you to be able to ask questions and gather information in a really safe environment. My name is Claire Black. I'm a specialist breakup and divorce coach and author of Breakup from Crisis to Confidence, you can see behind me. I specialise in working with clients who are contemplating divorce, going through a divorce or a breakup, or are even post-divorce and wondering what life looks like afterwards. So, as Lauren says, we've enabled the chat feature. There's also a Q&A feature as well, if you want to use that. So, as Lauren said, today we're talking about those of you who might perhaps own a joint business together or work together or be owners of a family business. And I know that when you're going through a divorce, it's a very, very stressful time anyway. It's now accepted as being the second most traumatic event you can go through in your life, next to losing a loved one. And when you own a business together or you run a business together, it can be doubly stressful for several reasons. First of all, your business might perhaps be one of your most valuable assets, and you're wondering what that's going to look like going forward, how you're going to deal with it. You're also perhaps facing the loss of not just your relationship, but also perhaps the loss of your joint business dream, your future plans, the things that you've been working for a long time. And if you work very closely together, I'm sure you probably have lots and lots of questions. So today, our aim is to help you get clarity on some of the options that you might have, as well as to give you some strategies that will enable you to continue to work together if you need to. Perhaps that's while you're negotiating an exit, or perhaps you've decided that you're going to keep the business running despite your divorce, or perhaps you need to keep the business going pending a sale. So the first thing, the first little piece of advice that I would give is to make sure that you always get clarity. Now that might be legal clarity, financial clarity. You're going to need really detached, independent advice. I will say clarity is the antidote to overwhelm. When you have clarity, it opens up options. And options mean that you have choices. So getting clarity on the possible ways forward will give you choices so that you can make a conscious choice to go one way or another. And there are lots of ways to deal with a business on divorce. So I'm going to ask Lauren perhaps to explain some of the different options perhaps that you've seen people take, and the choices perhaps that you've seen people take when they run a business together. First of all, perhaps if it's just a business with the two people involved, so quite simple, perhaps a partnership.
Yes, thank you, Claire. It's I think you're absolutely right. And when I'm advising people, there is the legal side of what needs to happen in respect of the marriage, which is then includes the resolution of the financial matters. But also there may be clarity required on employment issues, there may be clarity required on contractual issues, depending on the type of business that is being run. And you did touch on it in what you said, Claire, that there isn't just one option available. There could be a series of options. It could be that a decision is made for the business to carry on being run exactly as it is, and there may be distinct roles that the people have that's able to occur. Of course, it does depend on the level of conflict or the disagreements that may have arisen in respect of the breakdown of the marriage. And I know we're going to come on to talk about a few other points there later on. Of course, yes, there is the possibility that the business just needs to be shut, depending on what type of business it is, whether it's a limited company or a partnership, or a limited liability partnership. Will depend upon the legalities of dealing with that and other issues and other advice that may need to be taken. But also, I think that the important thing to think about is that decisions made in respect of the business, depending on what other assets there might be, need to be taken into the context of everything. But it might be that there can be a staged plan as to what's going to happen in respect of the business. And it might be that bits of it can continue, it might be bits of it can be separated, it might be that decisions are made that something would continue for a certain amount of time. There may be contractual obligations that mean that the business has to continue. So I think the message that I can give in respect of this is that you need to take the advice. You mentioned about it being just the two people in the divorce involved, Claire, but of course there may be a wider issue in respect of other family members that are involved, other people that are involved. Shall I make a few comments on that, or was there anything you wanted to interject with there?
No, that would be really helpful. So, you know, that there may be completely other things that you perhaps need to think about if you're part of a long-standing family business, or you've got friends involved, or, you know, so yes, that'd be really helpful. Thanks, Lauren. Depending
on background circumstances, especially with family businesses, there may be lack of paperwork in many respects as well, and there may be decisions that have been made by other family members. There may be a transition period happening as well within the family, aside from a divorce. But also there may be businesses which are not family members, where people have entered into contracts and have entered into shareholding agreements with other people, be it friends or be it purely on a business sense. And I think that there can be that kind of element of people being afraid of what may be in front of them, or there may be an element of not understanding those side of things. It might be that one person is if I say the more business astute person, and they understand everything that's going on and the other person doesn't. So I think my message would be is linking back to getting clarity is please don't feel any kind of vulnerability linked to that on the basis that you may be the person that doesn't understand it at the moment. That's my job, is to help understand what those issues are, to take the other advice that may be in other legal areas to assist you with that. And of course the support that you can offer, Claire, in your area combines together to give that total clarity on the situation.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, actually. You know, sometimes I work with clients who are quite confused perhaps about the legal options or the financial options, and I can help them to work out what questions they need to ask, so that they can go back to you or their financial advisor with the questions that they need the answers to once they understand the kind of the bigger context, and that can save an awful lot of fees sometimes. And the other thing I'd say is that there is never such a thing as a stupid question. If you don't know the answer to a question, it's likely that there are lots of other people who wouldn't know the answer to that question. So I would always ask if you're unsure about anything.
And I deal with a lot of divorce cases and separation cases that do have business elements in it, but I'm not a qualified contracts lawyer. I'm not a qualified employment lawyer. So although I have an awareness and understanding of a lot of those areas of law, I often do have to take advice with clients on their behalf to make sure that we do understand the bigger picture of the issues that there could be.
Yeah, absolutely. So Lauren, is there any other information that our listeners are well advised perhaps to gather together and in order to get that clarity that they need? What kind of information do you need to be able to give the best advice you can?
Yeah, so the starting point of any kind of financial resolution is to make sure that your solicitor understands the full picture of the finances. And that information gathering, we always hope, will be done on an informal basis. And by informal, I mean amicably between the people together at that stage, without there needing to be an element of court involvement. I think the one important thing that I think is important to mention at this stage is that not all cases are amicable, and there are sometimes cases where people do have an immediate concern that assets are going to be depleted or removed. That can be especially important if you've got cross-jurisdiction issues, or you've got issues where a business is operating, importing or exporting, or if there's contacts within that business abroad. This all sounds very dramatic, and often it isn't necessary, and certain court applications linked to these areas of law are very complex and expensive, but sometimes they are necessary to freeze assets or to prevent bank accounts being used. So you mustn't be afraid to raise these issues if you think it is important. But from my perspective of information, I need to have full information about private and business affairs. Sometimes, depending on who I'm acting for and their involvement in the business, that might not be immediately accessible, or one of the people may not actually understand what they need to provide. And that's where we link in with perhaps the accountant or a financial advisor to be able to request that information. Sometimes, depending on the businesses, I might need to advise a client to instruct a forensic accountant or a type of investigation into the business, so we can understand exactly what is happening. And again, it all sounds quite dramatic, but it often happens that businesses, when you've received good financial and tax advice, there may be subsidiary companies involved, there may be linked businesses in other ways. So it's really important that we understand, I understand, and get the correct advice to make sure we understand where the controlling issues come from, where the money's coming from, and also, more importantly, what the liabilities, if any, are. And that could be liabilities linked to just the general day-to-day operation of the business, but it could also be linked to whether any private guarantees have been given on things, and whether there is any links to, for instance, the matrimonial home. And it's just having that open awareness of everything that couple have, so that we can start looking at how it could be divided, and protecting the interests and the needs of my client is what I'm looking at.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So I guess there's two overriding words, aren't there? It's about being open and honest with what's there.
And that's where I suppose the conflict can come in, is that sadly in a lot of cases that doesn't happen. And an informal voluntary information gathering isn't getting anywhere.
Yeah.
And that's when a court process is required. And the effect of that court process is you're technically, the term is that you're asking the court for financial remedy proceedings. But what that means on the ground is that we're asking for people to put the information about their financial position and the business before the court, which gets you into the remit of that you of course have to be truthful to the court, else you're in contempt of the court process, and there can be all kinds of ramifications if you are misleading, committing any kind of fraud, or putting information that isn't true before the court. So I suppose my main message for my clients in situations like this is to not be afraid of this process. It's never a process that you want to go down, and we always hope that there can be amicable discussions, but the reality is that sometimes doesn't or can't happen for whatever reason. And my advice will be that you must have that process, because I can't give advice if you don't have it.
Yeah, brilliant, that's really useful, thank you, Lauren. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move on to think about strategies from my perspective that that you can use to help you to get through this process with as little stress and as little overwhelm as possible. So we talked about this already, but just to a little visual for it, really important to get that clarity right from the beginning. And then secondly, I talked about this a little bit earlier, but just to clarify, when I talk about options and choices, I'm always talking about if you believe you only have one option, then you're stuck. If you believe you have two options, then really what you've got is a dilemma and it's not much better. But if you can think of three options, that means you have choice. Now, one of the real important things about getting that clarity is so that you can work out exactly what your choices are. Because when you can make a conscious choice, that's when you feel empowered. You're making a conscious decision to go down one road or another road. And you can only make that choice from a position of having clarity and knowing what your options are. Strategies to respond rather than react. I'll just move us so that we can see it. There we go. It's going to be really important as you go through this process. This is true whether you're running a business together or not, but strategies to respond rather than reacting, they're really going to stand you in good stead. So first of all, focus on what you can control. And we talk about this all the time. You can control your part. You can control your words, your behavior, your actions. You can't control what the other person is doing. So focus on what you can control, because that's where your power lies. Secondly, use your breathing to get calm. Sometimes you will probably find that you feel a bit overwhelmed, or you feel anxious, or you feel worried. And then use your breathing. So there are a few strategies for this. Sometimes it's as simple as just taking a really deep breath. Other times you might like to breathe in and count to 5, hold for 2, and breathe out and count to 7 in your head. The beauty of that is that you can't count and think all at the same time, so it can help interrupt any swirling thoughts that you might have. Or alternatively, you can use your hands. So I use this with clients quite a lot. So breathe in as you go up, breathe out as you go down. In, out, in, out, in, out, in, out. And usually that will help you to feel a lot calmer. It gets oxygen back into your brain, helps soothe the fight, flight, freeze response. Thirdly, a little mantra: stop, breathe, think, respond. Always useful. But if you feel your emotions rising, perhaps you feel angry, always stop. Just take a pause, breathe, get that oxygen to your brain, and you can bring your logical brain back on side then, so that you can think before you respond or before you answer. I also like the 24-hour rule. This is more for when you're perhaps communicating over email. If an email comes in or a letter comes in that makes you feel angry or raises those emotions again, always leave it 24 hours if you can, because that will enable you to sleep on it. And while you sleep, you will be processing. You'll be processing what's happened. You'll be processing your options. You'll be processing what you feel. So 24-hour rule and sleep on it. And then never reply whilst you're angry. So you could draft a reply, put it into your drafts box. Please don't send it while you're feeling angry. Always go back to it. You might want to amend certain parts. Also look for any common ground. It's very easy when you're going through a separation or a divorce, especially if you've got a business that you run together, to notice all the areas where you differ and all the areas where you disagree and you perhaps argue. But if you can turn that around and start to look for any common ground, that will be really helpful in negotiations that you need to go through. And then take your time. When you're trying to negotiate what happens with a business that you run together, it isn't going to be quick. It won't necessarily be a decision you can make overnight. As we've said, you need all that information. You need to get clarity. You need to give your lawyer instructions and all that kind of thing. So take your time. You don't have to make a decision right now. Get advice if you need it, and then draft, but don't send. So I hope those are useful. And then I thought I'd just share a few little mantras you can keep perhaps in the front of your mind. Firstly, the more you can agree, the less it will cost you. The more conflict there is, the more expensive it will become. And then this too shall pass. And I often use that in conjunction with the breathing that I talked about earlier. So breathing in for 5, breathing out, holding for 2, and reminding yourself in that too, this too shall pass. In 5 years' time, this will be a memory. And then one step at a time. So if you can keep those 3 things, if nothing else, at the forefront of your mind, that hopefully will help you to keep focused. And then what if you decide you need to keep the business running? Perhaps that's while you're perhaps working together to negotiate an exit strategy, or perhaps you know that you've got various suppliers that you need to meet in the next 6 months, or maybe you're decided that actually you can cope with running this business together ongoing. I think it's really helpful to start to think of the business as a child. We talk very much in the divorce arena about putting the children's interests first if you have children. Now, if you have a business, if you can think of that business as a child and put the business interests first, then that's going to help the business to survive. Especially if your business is very valuable, perhaps it's your largest asset, you need to protect it. And it's conflict between you that will damage that. So what is in the best interests of the business moving forward? It's a really good question to ask. Another strategy is to create boxes. So perhaps get a pen, make a list of all the different areas that need to be discussed as part of your divorce. So there's the legal stuff, there's the business stuff, there's perhaps the emotional stuff. If you have children, there's the children's stuff, and then maybe there's other finances, other assets, the home, all of that kind of thing. And you may find that you have other boxes too. So for each box, you need to identify what the issues are, perhaps identify what you need, and identify what you're afraid of and face it head on. And then identify the outcome that you would like to get. And then once you've done that, you can open each box as and when you need it. So don't get all the contents of each box all muddled up together. I almost see it a bit like Lego sets. So if you've got, a Millennium Falcon and you've also got a castle, if you get all the bits muddled up together, you're never going to be able to create both sets without a lot of stress. So try and keep those boxes really, really separate as you go through this process. And then keeping the personal and the professional separate. So there are quite a few ways that you can do this, and I know this is really challenging, but the more that you can do to make this easy, the better. Let's move that again. So you could wear different clothes for your different roles. So your home clothes and your work clothes. Because when you put on a particular set of clothing, it will help you to feel a certain way. So keep your work clothes for work and keep your home clothes for home. Also imagine yourself wearing different hats. So when you're at home, you're wearing your home hat. When you're being mum or dad, you've got your mum or dad hat. When you're at work and you're running this business together, you're wearing your work hat. And it helps to set an intention around which hat you're wearing, perhaps at the start of every day. I would also advise shaking off when you move between those roles. And when I say shaking off, I mean literally shaking off. So standing up and shaking your body off like this. Shake your head, your arms, your legs, everything. It only takes a couple of moments, but it helps you to shift from being mum or dad or business partner or home, home parent or whatever it might be. So shake off between those roles. Again, breathing. And then a really useful strategy is to remind yourself what the other person brings to the table. So perhaps in your business, one of you is the one who goes out and wins the work, and the other one is the one who does all the paperwork in the background. Or one of you is the one that goes out and does the networking, and the other prefers to write the code. I don't know. Or maybe one of you performs the jobs and the other one does all the books and keeps all the finances on track. If possible, keep those roles separate, but remind yourself before you have any meetings, before you have any discussions about the business, always remind yourself of just one good thing that the other person brings to the table, and it will help you with your intention going into that meeting. So yes, keep the professional at work, the personal at home, and keep your end goal in mind. So defining your role is going to be really important here. So defining your roles really clearly. So set some clear boundaries if you can. Who does what within the business? If you set those boundaries and take responsibility for those bits, then you won't need to micromanage each other, and because that could lead to conflict. So set some very, very clear boundaries. You could perhaps consider putting a written contract into place, and I'm sure Lauren can either advise you on that herself or suggest somebody else that can do that. Be really clear on your goals and your vision as well. Where do you want to get to? What is your goal for this 6 months, say, that you have to keep working together? Or what is your goal for running this business if you plan to keep doing it in the long term? Or what is your goal in terms of selling it? What do you want to achieve and by when do you want to do it? Be really clear on those, and if you can, agree them. And then focus on where you agree. So focus on where you are in agreement rather than where you're in disagreement, so that you can keep yourselves on track. And then take advice if you need it. Always advisable to have an exit strategy in place. Nothing is certain. As you know, if you're going through a separation or divorce already, things can change. Things don't always stay the same. That's one thing that's pretty sure in life. So consider what you will do if one of you decides that they want to perhaps exit early, or one of you decides that actually this isn't the right way for you to go anymore and you don't want to run this business together in a long-term way. Take advice on this, get an exit strategy in place so that if one of you decides you do want to exit, you're able to do that as swiftly and as peacefully as possible. And lastly, from my perspective, create your support network. Getting your support network in place now is going to be hugely important. And we've touched on this already. Get your legal team in place, get your financial team in place, whether that's a financial planner, an accountant, a forensic accountant, whatever it is. Get your emotional support in place too, because this, when you're going through a separation and you run a business together, it's going to be affecting every aspect of your life. So get that emotional support in place. It may feel like an expense, but it will save you costs in the long run. Get your practical support in place too. You know, who can help you with perhaps the school run when you're both working, those kinds of things. Accounting, and also perhaps consider mediation. Perhaps there are other ways in which you can resolve any dispute between you. Which leads me nicely on actually to ask Lauren whether there are any other professionals that perhaps you might wish to add into your support network.
That's really helpful, thank you, Claire. And we have, when I'm looking at matters, of course, the emotional side of things, the practical side and the legal side, and all these things, because we're all only human, link together. So different professionals will be needed at different stages, either at different stages of how you are feeling going through the process, but also at different stages in relation to the divorce, in relation to court proceedings if they're needed in respect of the finances, and in respect of any of the processes that are needed in respect of the business. So a lot of these can be really complicated issues to work through, and you shouldn't be afraid to take time, take the support needed. So I think in relation to the way that third parties can assist, there's a couple of things I wanted to talk about. First of all, it's collaborative law. So I am a trained collaborative solicitor, and you have to have gone through training to become a collaborative solicitor and have to go through ongoing training as well. I'm a member of a collaborative local pod of solicitors, and collaborative law has been in our jurisdiction for some time, but what it requires is both solicitors that are involved and acting for the respective people that have both been trained. And it is a process where you are signing an agreement, a participation agreement, that you will not seek the court process, and that you are committing to, together with your solicitors as a team, resolving matters. So of course, the whole ethos of this process is that there is that level of collaboration, and also that you are willing to make compromises and willing to commit to the fact that things aren't going to be easy, but actually we can do this. And as part of that collaborative process, third parties can be invited into the process with you together. So that might be a financial advisor, that might be your accountant, that might be somebody totally independent that's required to help give an opinion on the future of the business. If there is high conflict between people, then the collaborative process might not be worth exploring, or I say worth exploring, it's always worth exploring, but it might not be something that can happen.
Yes, sorry to interrupt, Lauren. I think
no, of course.
Something that just came to mind based on what you were just saying was, at the beginning of the collaborative process, you would be able to set out those goals and that vision that I was talking about for where you want to get to, so that you've got a kind of you've got a shared plan, a shared vision, which you can bring each other back to and stay accountable for.
Yes,
is that right?
You absolutely do. Yes, thank you, Claire. Yes, it's part of the commitment to the process is that either a joint statement is made together with the solicitors and the parties together, or each person presents their own statement, which can then be tweaked together. They can be combined together. That part of it's flexible. But yes, that's exactly right, Claire. And that can be a reminder for everybody that if things do get tough in discussions, to remind everybody of that commitment and the goal that they are hoping to achieve. The collaborative process is a really, really good process to use. And perhaps on another occasion, Claire, we can talk about it again in other contexts. But if anybody does want any information on the collaborative process, please do let me know. If there is a high level conflict between parties, and or if you are within a court process, sometimes a court process is required because there simply cannot be agreement about something. That doesn't mean that there is not amicable communications in other ways. There may just be one distinct point that the parties need the court's help on. And as part of the court process, you can either you have to ask the court's permission, or it can be agreed, but you're still asking the court's permission for there to be a joint expert. And that is called a single joint expert, and it is somebody that is employed by the parties together to produce a report for the benefit of the court. It is a completely neutral report that is for the court's benefit, so that whatever information it is that it is in dispute is put before the court in a neutral way. So for instance, it often comes up with valuation. If there is something about the business as a whole, or elements of the business that the parties are arguing about what that actual value is. And again, this may be because one accountant that acts for one party saying one thing, another accountant is saying something else. And of course, within this context, there can be different ways of valuing a business, different things that need to be taken into account, and different ways of applying the variables that are used by the professionals for this. And ultimately then the court will decide, the court will accept the evidence given by that single joint expert. There is always within an amicable voluntary position between parties that you are able to gather your own evidence together, but the single joint expert would overtake that, if I can put it in that way, as in if a court has ordered a single joint expert, that is the expert advice that the court is seeking to rely upon.
That's really helpful, thank you. So I'm just sort of thinking, so for the benefit of our listeners, sometimes it's really useful to know some client stories. Effectively, what kind of, have you got any examples of particularly sort of innovative or creative solutions that perhaps some of your clients have had to sorting out a joint business between themselves?
Yeah, so one example of a case I dealt with was where one of the parties was very much the hands-on, dealing with the actual manufacturer of a product that the business manufactured, and the other party was in charge of dealing with office-based accounts, bookkeeping, day-to-day running of the business monies. But actually, even when they were still happily married, their job roles didn't cross, because the business was of a size and with other employees in place where they had their roles, and but both were excellent at dealing with their roles. And that they had a plan in place which had 4 years remaining of the type of contracts that the business was successful in obtaining, that was going to dramatically increase the value of the company, and they had always intended to sell it at that stage. And in this case, they were able to agree that they just wanted to continue running the business in the way they always had. And they were able to do that because of those distinct roles. Another example that I have had is where in a family business, people have just had to shift around a bit. And actually, they've been able to manage the running of the business so that the conflict is reduced whilst the process is being dealt with. And there are third-party specialists that do help. I suppose it's almost a bit kind of management consultant type expert, but also ones that specialize in family businesses. So it would depend on the circumstances as to who I would recommend you saw. And they specialize in looking at that productivity of the company and how it can be managed in an interim period.
That's really interesting. From my perspective, I worked with a client a year or so ago who was involved in a business that had been set up, the couple plus another couple, and one of the couples were getting divorced. And what they did in the end was, again, I think they had slightly different roles. It was quite a creative business, and the husband and the wife had very different creative roles within that business. They weren't able to continue to work together in that business, but what they did was sit down with somebody like you've just talked about, and they split off the different roles within that business into two separate businesses. So now the ex-wife runs one business and the ex-husband runs another, both of which were kind of spin-offs from the original. Yeah. And the ex-wife runs it still with the other wife from the other couple that were involved. And that took about 18 months, I think, to work through and resolve, but has resulted in two very successful businesses coming out the other side, which are similar but different.
The other thing as well that I've had experience of is when you do have one person that simply can't continue within their role that they're in, either because the mental health impact or emotional impact that the breakdown of the relationship has had on them, or because something has happened, and sometimes sadly there is a domestic incident or abuse that has happened which stops that being possible. And what has happened in circumstances like that when I have dealt with businesses is that actually it has been cost effective for the business to employ someone to fill their role, or for there to be a consultant, for want of a better way of describing it, a locum to step in to cover whatever that work is for the period of time that person feels unable to engage, because of course there could be a really massive detriment to the earning capacity of the two people together and the business, depending on whether it's a company or partnership, depends how it's set up, that of course everybody wants to avoid happening. But health can impact massively on that, as we know. So I suppose it's not to be afraid to explore those possibilities. And to one of the things that we look at during a process is, especially if it's a court process, if somebody has maliciously done something to the detriment of their own assets. And I'm not saying that a health issue would be within that category, but sometimes people point blank disengage from their responsibilities because they do wish to cause a hurt to the other person, but actually it's the not cutting off your nose to spite your face, because the assets are matrimonial assets at that stage.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So I would be, if I was working with that person, I'd be asking you about motivation and what's your, if you honestly examine your own motivations and your own intentions, what are they? And are those intentions in the best interest of the business and actually ultimately yourself?
And this is where other experts may be needed, because of course if it is a company, if you're a director or a secretary, there is fiduciary duties that they have, and if you are breaching those duties as a director or a trustee, you could be committing a serious offence if other people are affected by it. So again, I feel like I'm slightly making some dramatic comments, but I think it's important, especially if whoever's listening to this is a person involved in a business that doesn't quite understand the responsibilities, please don't be afraid to ask us about it, because it's really important that we know the full picture, so we understand and I can advise you on the implications of things.
Yeah, no, that's a really important point, I think. One of the other things I guess that comes up fairly often is what's your advice, for example, if the reason for the breakdown of the marriage is something to do with somebody else who works in the business but has perhaps had a relationship with your partner that, you know, outside of the marriage, a betrayal of some sort?
Again, it's a common occurrence, especially in I say a common occurrence. I've dealt with a lot of cases where that's happened. It has to be very carefully managed. If you're the person that feels that you've been betrayed, of course you've got your own emotional health and well-being to think about, but of course there could be employment issues there as well, so we would need to perhaps take some advice about that. And again, links back into the fact that there is within the law a difference between how the law applies and what morally us as human beings may feel about a situation. So because you may feel that you have been morally treated badly, that doesn't mean the law supports your action of stopping to do something or starting to do something in relation to a business. You could actually there's that conflict in law and morality, I think is probably the best way of putting it. But yeah, it's a really, really tough situation to be in, and I really sympathize for anybody that does have to face that, because it's that big conflict of your head and your heart, and having to deal with your life, and we'll support you through it as best we can.
Yeah, I think that's it's a good example of a time when it's really important to have that proper support network in place of all the different supports that you might need, the different buffers that you might need, and the different people that you might need to lean on at particular times to get through something like that.
And I think probably in every session we have, Claire, and it comes up, it's that importance of the boundaries. And you said earlier about the boundaries of and the way that you have different hats on in different roles potentially, and I think that's just so important to set your own boundaries within those different relationships. And of course the other thing that may come up is if there is something that's happened within the workplace, for want of a better way of describing it, people do take sides. So there could be that situation where you've got some people that are more friendly at work with one party and other people that are more friendly at work with another party. So it's that whole dynamic of how that's managed.
Yes, and that can be an interesting one when you have friends effectively involved who perhaps can stoke the fire. And so, you know, that's when it becomes really important again to have that impartial, independent advice from somebody outside. I always compare it to being down a well. So if you're sitting down the bottom of the well and it's cold and it's dark and it's horrible, your friends who perhaps might be very sympathetic to you and take your side might climb in and help you to stay longer in the well and get colder and more miserable. Whereas actually sometimes what you need is somebody who can climb down the well with a ladder and show you some tools to take some steps up so that you can climb out. So again, really important to have that support network in place.
Oh, the other thing that I know we're starting to run a bit short of time, Claire, but I think one of the things as well is if there is a court process in place, there may be the need, and as often there will be, for there to be an interim order put in place.
Okay.
So that doesn't mean that final decisions are being made about what happens with the business or the people's financial matters or income issues, but there may be that need for there to be that almost a holding position of what will happen pending resolution.
Yeah, so it's kind of the way I'm seeing that in my mind, it's kind of, this is what we will do whilst we're sorting everything out.
Exactly. Yeah. And sometimes that is, well, usually that's a really good thing to have. And you mentioned, I can't remember which part you said it on now, where you said about whether there can be a contract between
Yes.
parties. So that may need to be something out of my remit to do with employment, or it could be a written agreement which may not have the same legal standing as a contract within the context of family law, but again, a commitment between the parties of their intentions.
Yes.
And if that's done in an amicable context, then that can just be recorded by everybody. But if it's done within the court process, then that would be done as an interim court order, which is binding on the parties.
Brilliant. That's really helpful.
And again, I think that quite nicely probably links back to your first comment, Claire, about clarity.
Yeah.
And having, I say to people to not be afraid of the court. The family court is there to assist people reach resolution. And apart from the awful delays that have been caused by the circumstances we've been in for 2 years, the judges do their best to assist as best they can. So although we try to avoid court as much as we can, the court is there to provide that clarity if the parties can't reach it themselves. So it's not something to be afraid of. It's almost something to embrace, because there has to be an end point. There has to be a point where the matter is resolved. And if that cannot happen amicably, it has to happen by help of the court. Yeah,
that's a really good way to look at it, I think. Which probably brings us quite neatly on to just letting everybody know what we're talking about next time and when it's going to be. So our next meeting is going to be on the 31st of March, I think is a Thursday, at 1 o'clock. And I think we're going to talk a little bit more about some of those boundaries that come up every time. We've looked at it before, but we'll look at it again, and then perhaps in a different way next time. So just like to say thank you to everybody for coming, and we hope to see you again next time. And please don't hesitate to get in touch with either Lauren or myself in between sessions if you have any questions or you'd like to find out more about how we can help you individually. Yeah, and yes, thank you everybody, and stay safe in the bad weather, and hopefully we have some developments of how we're going to develop this support club, which we're just in the process of putting together the final touches. So we'll be able to hopefully talk about that next month as well. Fantastic. Thank you very much, everybody.